Hello, my beautiful students. Get ready to solve two-step equations. It is just that. We're going to be able to solve just using two steps. The first step is the additive inverse. You're either going to add or subtract to isolate the variable. You're always thinking like thing 1 and thing 2 when you're solving an equation. You're doing the opposite of what you're being told. So if the equation is telling you to add, you are going to subtract. And if the equation is telling you to subtract, you are going to add. Step 2 is the multiplicative inverse. This is the very last step. You're either going to multiply or divide to solve for the variable. As an extra tip, make sure that you check your solutions. So let's look at the first example. On this one, we have r divided by 6 minus 3 equals 5. The variable term in this example is r divided by 6. So what's happening to it? It's being subtracted by a 3. So what would things do? They would add. Remember, always do the opposite, just like thing 1 and thing 2. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. Now what happens when you're adding opposites? For example, on negative 3 plus 3, we get a zero pair, and that's the whole purpose, is trying to get rid of that. So now we have r divided by 6, which is equal to 8. How do we get the 8? The 5 plus the 3. All right, the next step. The r is being divided by a 6. What is the opposite of dividing by a 6? Multiplying by a 6. So we're multiplying both sides by a 6. Now what is 6 divided by 6? It's equal to 1. Right there. And then we get r equals 48. Don't forget to check your solutions. You did all this work, might as well check it to make sure that you got it correct. So we go ahead and rewrite the original equation, but in this case, we're going to substitute the value we got for r, which is 48. 48 divided by 6 is equal to 8. And 8 take away 3 is equal to 5. Is 5 equal to 5? Yes. And this is how we know we got our answer correct. Now let's try another one. Go ahead and pause this video and give yourself some time to work out this problem following the steps 1 and step 2, doing the additive inverse and then the multiplicative inverse. Okay. What is the variable term? R divided by 2. That is correct. And what is happening to it? It's being subtracted by a 6. So what would thing 1 and thing 2 do? They would do the opposite of subtracting a 6, which is add a 6 to both sides. Now remember, opposites are always equal to 0. And therefore we get negative 11 plus 6 equals negative 5. Now we have r divided by 2. What would thing 1 and thing 2 do? What is the opposite of dividing by 2? So let's go ahead and multiply by 2. We get 1 times r, which is r, and we get negative 5 times 2. Now what's a negative times a positive? A negative times a positive is a negative, so therefore it's going to be negative 10. Now remember, check your work. So let's rewrite the problem and substitute the r with the value we found, which is negative 10. What's negative 10 divided by 2? Negative 5. Now same signs, what do? We add and keep the sign. So what's negative 5 plus negative 6? Negative 11. And that's how you know you got it right. Let's try another one. Please pause the video and give yourself some time to try solving this problem. Alright, I hope you isolated the variable term. What is the variable term? In this particular equation, it's r divided by 6. Now this is being added by a 3. What was your first step? What's the additive inverse of adding a 3? Yes, subtracting a 3. And whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. And what's 3 take away 3? Yes, it's 0. So now let's go ahead and do 5 take away 3, which is going to equal 2. All right now the r is being divided by 6. What is the multiplicative inverse of dividing by a 6? Yes, it's multiplying both sides by a 6. So we get 1r is equal to 2 times 6. What is 2 times 6? Did you get what I get? R equals 12? If you did, congratulations. You know you can do it if you try. So now let's go ahead and check it. We do it by rewriting the original problem and substituting the r with the value of 12 because that's what we got. Now what's 12 divided by 6? Yes, it's 2. And what's 2 plus 3? Yes, it's 5. And 5 is equal to 5. Let's try another one. Remember, try. Go ahead and pause the video if you haven't done so and write this down and work it out. Did you isolate the variable term? What is the variable term in this equation? R divided by 3. And what is happening to it? It's being what? Yes, it's being added by an 8. So what's the opposite of adding an 8? Did you answer subtract an 8 to both sides? If you did, that is correct. What do you get when you add opposites? Positive 8 and negative 8. Yes, we get a 0. Now, over here we have the same sign. So what's negative 1 plus negative 8? Did you say negative 9? I agree with you. So now we're going to do step 2, which is the multiplicative inverse. The r is being divided by a 3. What is the opposite of dividing by a 3? Multiplying both sides by a 3. I agree. We get a 1r. And now over here, what's a negative times a positive? A negative times a positive is a negative. Good. So therefore we get r equals negative 27 because 9 times 3 is 27. Don't forget, check your solution. What's negative 27 divided by 3? Negative 9. And what's negative 9 plus 8? Negative 1. Because different signs, what do we do when we have different signs? We subtract and we keep the sign of the larger absolute value. Alright, so we're coming to our next example. And as you see, I already put a box around my variable term. What do you notice? It's in the second spot, right? And what's happening to it? It's being added by a negative 3. What's the opposite of a negative 3? Yes, it's a positive 3. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 3 to both sides. Negative 3 plus 3 is going to give me my 0 pair. And then I just have to rewrite the equation. Now, on this other side of the equal sign, we have negative 9 plus 3. Remember, different signs we're supposed to subtract, and we keep the sign of the larger absolute value. So what's negative 9 plus 3? Well, we subtract and we get 6, and we keep the negative because the 9 is larger number, so we keep the negative. Now we have r divided by 9. What's the opposite of dividing by a 9? If you answered multiplying by 9, I agree with you. We're going to multiply both sides by a 9. Notice how the steps are the same as before. So what do we get? We get 1r equals negative 6 times 9. Now we have a negative times a positive. Therefore, it equals a negative. And we get negative 54. So now let's go ahead and check it. Again, rewrite the original problem, leaving a blank space for the variable. And we're going to substitute it with negative 54. Now, what's negative 54 divided by 9? Well, negative divided by a positive equals a negative. So we get negative 3 plus negative 6 equals negative 9. Now these, we're adding with the same sign. So when we're adding a -3 plus a -6, we add them and keep the sign, which equals -9. Is -9 equal to -9? Yes. So we know our answer is correct. Now you try. Go ahead and pause the video. You never know until you try. Did you remember to isolate the variable term? What is it? If you said r divided by 3, I agree. And notice how I include also the addition symbol because it belongs to the r divided by 3. So what's happening? It's being added by a -8. What's the opposite of a -8? Did you put a +8 on both sides? If you did, I agree with you. Great job. Now what happens when you have a -8 plus an 8? It equals 0. That is correct. And what's a -4 plus an 8? We're adding and they have different signs. So what do? We subtract. So what's 8 take away 4? It's +4. Because we keep the positive because the positive is larger absolute value. Now what do we have here? We have r divided by 3. What's the opposite of dividing by a 3? Yes, it's multiplying by a 3. You always multiply by the number that the variable is being divided by. And in this case, it was 3. So what do we get on the side of the r? We get a 1. And what's 4 times 3? Did you get r equals 12? If you did, great job. Congratulate yourself. You're doing it. So now let's go ahead and check it. We got 12 as a value for r. So let's substitute. What's 12 divided by 3? Yes, it's 4. And what's -8 plus 4? -4. Because in this particular case, the -8 has the largest absolute value. So we keep the sign of the negative. All right, here's a new one. Pause the video and you try. Did you isolate the variable term? And if so, what did you isolate? Do you agree with me? Is it r divided by 2? So what's happening? It's being added by a -5. So what's the additive inverse of a -5? If you answered add a 5 or +5, you are right. Or even +5. And we do that to both sides of the equal sign. So what do we get when we have opposites? Yes, a 0. So let's go ahead and rewrite it. Now don't forget, -12 plus 5, there's different signs. So what do? We subtract and we keep the sign of the larger absolute value. And in this case, the larger absolute value belongs to the -12. So therefore our answer is going to be -7. Did you get this? If you did, you should be very happy with yourselves and congratulating yourselves. It's okay to be proud of yourself. So now what's our next step? If the r is being divided by 2, what is the opposite of divide? If you said multiply by 2, you are correct. So we get a 1r equals, now what's -7 times 2? Remember, a negative times a positive is a, in case you need it. But if you answered negative, I agree with you. It's a -14. So let's go ahead and check our answer. So I substitute my r with the value, which is -14 that we found. And what's -14 divided by a +2? If you answered -7, you are correct. Now we have -5 plus -7. They have the same sign. So what do we do when we have the same sign? We add and keep the sign. So what's 5 plus 7? It's 12. And we're going to keep the negative. And guess what? Our answer was correct. Let's move on. Please pause the video so that you give yourself a chance to try. What is the variable term in this one? Did you put a square around the r divided by 5? If you did, you're right in with me. Good job. What was your next step? If you said the additive inverse, I agree. So what's the additive inverse of a negative 1? Yes, a positive 1. And what happens to the ones? We get a 0. Now what's negative 12 plus 1? Remember, different signs. What do we do when we have different signs? We subtract and we keep the sign of the larger absolute value. And in this case, it's going to be a negative 11. I agree. Now what's happening here? We have the r divided by 5. What's the opposite of r divided by 5? If we're dividing by 5, the opposite would be, yes, multiplying by 5. Now remember, what you do to one side, you do to the other. So we get a 1 on r equals, now what's a negative times a positive? A negative. And what's 11 times 5? 55. Good job. Now let's go ahead and substitute it into our original equation. And what's negative 55 divided by a positive 5? Yes, it's negative 11. And what's negative 1 plus negative 11? Same signs. We add and keep the sign. So if you answer negative 12 equals negative 12, you are correct. Alright guys, now we reached the ending. Now it's your turn to solve the two-step equations using the following two steps. Look for